Hey, podcast. In this episode, we talk to Patrick Ryan, Vice President of Innovation for Laz Parking. We have a very practical discussion about the future of our industry, what Laz's role is now and what it will be in the future, and how technology will play a part. Hope you enjoy. So I'm Lester Mascon, and this is Parker X, and today we're sitting with Patrick Ryan. How you doing, Patrick?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for being on the show. So, just gonna jump right in. Why don't you take us a little bit through kind of your background? Like, so you're from New Jersey, right? Judging by your accent.
I'm from the deep south.
Yeah,
The very,
really
very deep south. Yeah, so I'm originally from Australia. I've been in the US for 21 years.
Okay.
And I've been in parking for 26 years. I think we worked out earlier.
Wow, it's a long time.
Yeah, so I got into parking in the equipment side of it in Australia.
Okay.
Worked for a company that really was part of the founding of pay by space, multi-space parking.
Were they doing pay by plate then too, or was it all just multi-space?
No, it was press a button to get your space on the street. Instead of having, say, 8 parking meters, they put 1 parking meter in place. Yeah,
Kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah, it did make sense at the time. The interesting thing is it came out of South African trade embargoes from the apartheid era.
Oh,
So yeah, because the only parking meters available were American.
okay.
The Duncans and the POMs of the world. And because of the trade embargoes in South Africa, you couldn't get them. They had their own payphone industry, and necessity being the mother of invention, they decided that they would convert a payphone, which accepted coins and credit cards, into a parking meter because they couldn't buy American parking meters.
So what year was this?
Well, when I joined was 93, but
Okay.
they'd been doing it for maybe 5 or so years before that. So
Okay.
late 80s.
So kind of innovative though to be doing credit cards at payphones and stuff during that time.
Yeah, so that did come a little bit later.
Okay.
But the real key was that you could pay for parking in South Africa without American parking meters. That's where it all came from. And the guy by the name of Sid Breinhardt brought it to Australia, and
Okay.
I worked for him in 1993.
Okay. So you stayed with them until you came over to the U.S.?
I did actually. I set up the first U.S. office of that company in San Francisco in 98.
Who's that company today? They were obviously purchased by someone?
Well, it actually worked out the other way around a little bit in that they acquired a bunch of companies, including some parking enforcement processing companies,
Okay.
PAM out of Wisconsin, and Enforcement Technologies out of Southern California. And the last thing they acquired when I was still with them was Duncan parking meters. So The irony of that is, of course, that it came from not being able to get hold of Duncan parking meters, and they ended up acquiring them in about 2005.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's funny how that changes, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
So then you transitioned to Laz from there?
I did a couple of different things. I worked for a couple of little startups in San Diego in the mid 2000s, and joined went back to parking in 2000 and let's see, what would that be? 2009.
Okay, so is that post the whole Laz and the Chicago piece and all that, or is it?
It is actually right in the middle of that. In fact,
Okay.
I knew some of the Laz team back then, and they had started Chicago, and they were looking for somebody who had municipal on-street parking meter experience, and that was a pretty narrow focus. But I was someone that they knew and trusted, and knew a lot about on-street pay stations, so they pulled me into that project. Firstly, it was, dude, don't worry, you'll only be here for 3 days. Then it was, I promise it'll only be 3 months. Well, so now I've been with Laz for more than 10 years. So
Wow.
That's, like everybody in the parking industry, you sort of get sucked into it.
It's a consistent story.
It is. It absolutely. You don't grow up and say, I want to be a fireman or a parking guy. So in Chicago, I ran the whole team that did the replacement of the single space parking meters and replaced them with pay stations. And we put 4,700 pay stations out on the street, functioning in about 7 months or 8 months.
That's such an amazing thing Laz did when that came about. I mean, because it wasn't really like this huge, it wasn't like a central parking or an SP Plus. It was just, it's like, who did that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it was a big project, but we, had a great team on the ground. I was happy to be part of it, but a lot of awesome people on that team.
I bet you learned a lot on doing that too.
Did learn a lot. I think it really changed the way that sort of stuff is done today. It's really sort of systematized it. The city had a targeted 2-day meter repair time, and obviously the new technology enabled that to come way back down to like 40 minutes or something. So
wow,
technology really makes that much more efficient.
So fast forward a bit. So I mean, that's kind of your entry into that kind of area there. I mean, that was such a landmark thing that occurred too in the industry.
Right.
So now it's 2019, and so many changes are coming in the industry now. So many things are happening. I mean, what are you planning for right now? Like, what do you think you need to plan for? Where do you think things are going? Oh, like driverless cars. I mean, everybody has that kind of dystopian future view is set, right? There's so many pictures of it, and I'm just gonna fall asleep in my car, and there's not even gonna be a steering wheel. I'm gonna black out the windows. I'm just gonna roll. It's gonna take a little while to get there, though. But so, what are your thoughts?
It is, and it's interesting because go back to 1993 in Australia, and we had there was no real cellular phones were not a big thing still. I mean, they certainly weren't. They were for making a call. There was a little bit of texting, but we had cables running down the streets between these parking meters.
Really?
And they were communicating over, back then they were
485 or something.
I don't remember exactly what it was, but everyone says, well, the parking industry is in this sort of upheaval and there's a lot going on, but the whole 26 years I've been involved, I've been hearing that exact same thing. So I don't know that it's really any more that the pace has changed. I think it's just a little bit more noticed by the general public and the investment community and those kind of things. But it is more and more, parking is more and more getting folded into people's general view of it, a trip, if you like. So parking is less of a distinct thing, and I think that is what the future holds, in that sort of from the minute you get out of bed and put on your socks and hopefully more than just your socks, but you put on your clothes and head to your office or whatever, or head to an event. Now I think the future is, what piece of that does parking hold? And that's the key part.
It becomes part of your planning process.
It really does. Planning, or even better, it becomes a transparent part of your overall trip. Sure. In the same kind of way that you can, you can get in your car and drive somewhere and you're getting directions from some kind of map.
So I'm going to go to the mall on Christmas Eve, and I'm not even going to be worried about parking. It's just going to be something that happens when I get there, and I don't have to be.
Yeah, look, in an ideal world, parking should be completely transparent. It should be like stepping off a curb or stepping on a curb. You shouldn't be thinking about it.
So how do we get there?
Like, I think technology has a huge amount to play for that, right? The way that people consume other goods and services today is through their phones or through the dashboards of their cars, or to some degree, their computers or their TVs. And because parking's so fragmented, it's been difficult for the industry to do that. But
there's not an Amazon sitting over top of all the parking spaces that you need to go.
There's not yet.
There's not yet.
No, but there definitely could be. And Amazon is made up of tons and tons of individuals, big ones and little ones. Mm-hmm. And I don't see parking as really any different from that. The difference is that there needs to be a way to share the information and to share access is a really key is a key part of that.
So where does that responsibility lie? Like, who's going to make those changes?
Look, I think it comes from a combination of industry leaders and some of the bigger companies. There are so many different ways that you can do this, that as long as everybody's pulling in the same direction, with some guidance, from some of the influences in the industry, I think everyone will sort of head in that direction, assuming that that's the right way to go. I don't think there really needs to be sort of this enforced standard or anything. I think it will naturally get there, and it's already starting to do that in many ways.
So is that the value that the parking operator brings in the future, or the parking operations group, or whatever that is? At some point, it's not going to be people and those things that necessarily there.
Yeah, I think that the parking operator, the key thing that the parking operator has is the connections to that individual who owns a parking garage or a parking lot.
Sure.
Because of that fragmentation, there's got to be some kind of aggregation point. And the operator has those relationships with all those owners. So I think that's really important. And I think that
somebody's got to tie it all together. Somebody's got to pull this into.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to be the center of gravity on this.
Right. I think it comes from a few places. The parking equipment provider, sort of in conjunction with operators and in conjunction with parking garage owners, parking lot owners, and also other pieces of the technology community, is another point to tie that together. Parking operators typically are not in the business of building parking equipment and dealing with technology and building all of that stuff. So we do rely on on good technology providers to help do that.
That makes sense. So if you think about like the landmark things that'll occur over the next few years, and what do you have your eye on? Like I'm not convinced on Bluetooth that it's going to be like this amazing thing, but I do see the need for the vehicle to be able to communicate with the parking facility on some level. Like, how's that happen? And what are you banking on now for like going forward?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a bit of a leapfrog. So right now, if you think about it, the average car age in the US is about 10.8 years, and the average phone age is about 2.2. And then within that 2.2, you've got probably 4 or 5 different major software updates that for the most part happen automatically for the phone population. Something like 60% of iOS updates happen within the first day. And then the remainder eventually happen. So
it does bug you till you do it endlessly.
Yeah, absolutely. But so cars have they have a long product lead time, and they are really the only thing that is common to a parking transaction, right? That you do have a car. So ultimately, of course, it should be the car, because if you think about an autonomous car, no driver, but still a car. So it makes sense that in the future that is the car is the credential, or the car releases the credential to get into a place. But while there's still a 5 times churn for phones, the technology on the phones is what will be the interim solution. So that's sort of why you're seeing QR codes, which can be displayed on the phone. That's very universal right now. You'll also see Bluetooth. It's not universal because you require an app, and many of your parkers who are coming into a parking location don't have an app and won't have an app specifically. But the vehicle has a license plate, and that's also not universal today. It's universal in that there's a license plate, but it's not really universal in that every garage and every parking location doesn't have cameras and won't be able to have cameras.
I think you're in bigger states too. You're a little immune to the multi-state issues that come from that. Like if you're in Texas or California, you can kind of, really comfortable with the fact that like 90+% of your plates are going to be the same, or at least from the same state, getting to DC in those areas and stuff, and it becomes very much a different issue.
Yeah, it does. And all the specialized plates and things you
Sure.
have in the US, it's a lot harder to control than Europe, where a lot of the license plate recognition equipment comes from. So, look, some variation of that, but it really doesn't matter for now, whether it's phone-based or vehicle-based. Whatever credential, like, look, if you call into Ticketmaster or someone like that and you say, I have a problem with my baseball tickets, they can say, can you tell me the confirmation number? And you can say, well, I don't have that in front of me. And they say, okay, that's one credential, but you don't have that. Can you tell me your last name? All right, well, you've got that. What about your phone number? Okay, here's your phone number. And they're looking up a record. So whether the automated garage does exactly the same same function as that person does, they don't care whether, am I looking this transaction up by license plate or by Bluetooth or by QR. It's just another way to look up the exact same record. So it really doesn't matter.
That makes sense. Any strong push to go ticketless for your transient parkers? Do you think that's something that needs to happen? Any sense of urgency around that happening?
I don't really think it's critical at the moment. The ticket is a little bit of a waste. It's not environmentally friendly. It's a little bit of a waste to pull a ticket, carry it around in your pocket.
Really too, right?
Yeah, and so it's not really necessary, but still the vast majority of people coming into a parking lot are still doing it quite unplanned, and they don't have an app that may coordinate with that specific parking location. So you got to go down to what really is the overarching thing that most customers are going to be able to use, and it's a ticket still. It's pretty low tech, but
it's definitely a safety net. It's going to be there, right? It'll work no matter what. I think that's the
right.
It's interesting ideas on that. So fast forward 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that we'll be able to do you think gates will still be in place?
Look, I think in 10 years they probably will.
There's a lot of push for it, right? I mean, it's a lot of push to go gateless, and I'm not sure if it's just more. I'm not sure what the desire is necessarily. I know you want to achieve this ultimate frictionless environment. You remove the gates. People seem to think that'll be an easier transaction, but I'm not sure if it's going to keep revenue collection where it needs to be or not.
Right.
Yet.
Sometimes you're right. There's this sort of, wow, it would be cool to go gateless, and
Yeah.
and it seems frictionless, but it adds a lot of complexity. And okay, now I have to have a camera, and that camera has to start the transaction. Yeah, and then that's it. You hit the nail on the head. If you don't have a state where you can enforce parking in private locations, then you need a gate. And the gate does a simple function. It says, you can't come in here unless you agree to pay. You take a ticket, and the terms are on the back of the ticket, and you go in.
It's a really simple way to put it, but that's exactly what it is.
That's really it. And also, unless you actually pay, you don't get out. Right? So with the surface parking lot, you let people on, and 25% of people won't pay. So you need to have a way to track those people and enforce them. And in places like California, there's not a lot you can really do if they decide not to pay, other than to track them and hope to grab them next time.
I wonder how that legislation is going to affect in California. So that now that you saying you can't boot and you can't touch a person's vehicle, and you can't, I'm not sure if it does mean you can't tow, but you can't tire chalk and you can't boot. Mm-hmm. It kind of takes a few of those weapons away too.
It does. Look, the interesting thing about chalking is
that's like a ticket almost. That's really low tech.
Yeah, it's very low tech, and it's crazy that a lot of municipalities still do that and rely on it. But the kind of advocates for, I think it's the Fourth Amendment, which is reasonable search or something.
Yeah.
I apologize. I'm a foreigner, so.
This is where I'm supposed to step in and say it out loud, and I'm not.
So what the advocates of that really were trying to probably do is water down the ability to enforce parking by I think it's reasonable search. Maybe
Yeah.
that's what it is. You know, by saying, well, maybe if we stop people chalking, then, you know, they won't be able to enforce parking. But of course, chalking is far less efficient than license plate recognition. And license plate recognition isn't covered by the Fourth Amendment because you're not touching the vehicle.
So I promise you, as soon as that, like, all that hit the news, like, people like Genetec and Frog Parking and those companies were just cheering.
Yeah.
Watching that happen.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God.
Fantastic.
Thank you,
Yeah.
United States.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. So look, what the unintended consequences of that little battle were is that now parking enforcement will by nature become a lot more efficient because a Genetec vehicle driving down
It's going to it'll cost jobs too.
yeah, and pinging plates. So
Yeah, I got to play with Genetec a little bit. That technology is amazing. When you
Yeah.
see the closing distance that it can capture vehicles and the angles and everything.
yeah,
It's
we use it in a lot of places.
okay.
You know, where we have it vehicle mounted, and you know, it's pretty effective. It can really churn through, especially in a university environment, thousands and thousands of cars, and make sure that they're, you know, paid and they're in the right place and they have a permit and all of those kind of things.
So let's talk a little bit about your role today. So let's say you started with LAS, but today now you're in a much different position with LAS than worrying about all the on-street meters. And
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, my official title is VP of Innovation, and that's just a broad blanket. It really
it's a big responsibility for such a large company.
yeah, it's interesting because, you know, innovation in parking is a very different level of, you know, with innovation in a lot of other places. But I think the key thing is to really look at the e-commerce, customer-focused, customer-facing side of the business and think of, you know, what do you do with a customer who used to make a decision on parking when they drove down the street? Now they're making their decision further and further away from that location. And how do you reach those people and their decision point before they get to the garage? And that's the piece that I deal with, basically everything until they get to that gate.
I kind of imagine a place where I can be at home and I'm going to go, hey, Alexa, Google, whatever. I'm going to go to dinner here. Let's get me some parking arranged within like 200 feet or 300 feet or wherever I feel like walking that night.
Yeah.
For whatever price point.
Yeah, and I think, you know, perhaps
and
even
it goes right into my car after that happens.
Right.
My car knows where I'm going after that. And
yeah.
Yeah.
And perhaps even, you know, even more is I'm going here. In the same way that you can ask today, how does traffic look? You can also ask, how does parking look? Okay. And they can say, I've found 4 parking locations around and it's pretty good. Or maybe you should pay now because parking's looking pretty tight and it looks like it's tightening up. So that for sure, the ability for those channels to have that data is absolutely critical to what I do with LAS.
So that's another piece to it too, actually being able to take the history of how that lot fills up on different days under different conditions, or that facility, and then make a prediction of what the availability will be like when you get there, not when you leave your house, which could be an hour away.
Yeah, it is. And, you know, the data is the key to that. So that part of my world is making sure that as a parking operator that has a big chunk of a lot of the cities across the US, that we have a way to output that information so that sellers of that information can understand it, what we're charging for parking right now, and how parking is looking in terms of availability right now.
And what are you working on that you can talk about now, like that's coming? What's coming from LAS in the near future?
Sure. So I guess that's my left hand. So we've developed a whole database of all of our locations, and we can output all that information through a service called Bouncer that includes pricing and in some cases availability, although that's limited by the garage. But that allows different sellers of parking to reach in securely into our system and get any pricing live and populate their own maps with that information. And they can also transact and send the transaction back through us so that we can send it to the parking equipment so that when the customer shows up, they're already expected. So
And then that's all live now.
that's live now. Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
Sounds like you guys are trying to be the Amazon of the parking world.
Well, I don't think we really want to be the Amazon, because I think parking operators' role isn't that far out to the consumer.
Okay.
I think what we have to assume is that we'd be wasting our time competing against an Amazon or being the Amazon, because there are going to be, Apples and Googles and Amazons and Facebooks and everything. Yeah, but I think the key is we want to provide that data in a way that whatever the market is out there can consume it and show it to whoever, because ultimately it comes back to the customer, and we don't want to dictate, hey, you have to have a LAS parking app. Some people do, our regular monthly parkers will, but some other people will say, look, I want to use Google Maps and I want to use my Google Wallet in Google Maps, and that's where I want to pay for parking. Well, we shouldn't tell them that, because that's not a great customer experience. What we should do is provide that data to all of those different channels and have them be able to consume it, display it how they want, and sell it to their customers. Yeah.
Do you guys see yourself offering this independently of being the actual operator at the facility?
We have done for things like Superball.
Okay.
I don't know that we necessarily do. I mean, look, it's a big enough job to do that just for our 3,000 location install base. But there's no reason why we couldn't, or the parking industry is, as much as you kind of see competitors in it, we really are good at sharing. In many places we'll have a garage, and a theoretical competitor runs the parking in 3 hotels nearby, and guess where they park their cars? Well, they park them in our garage. And so there's a bunch of those kind of things. So there's no reason why not. At the moment, that's not the top priority. It's really about making sure that that sellers know what parking costs and have all the information, like the clearance height and the availability and all those kind of things.
That makes sense. Yeah, it sounds like a big enough job.
and to loop back to your really original question, which was, where is it going? The other part of my job is to look at parking as space, not as parking. Because really where it's going is that, you have, say, restaurant valets in some hotels, that there are now other choices, such as Uber and Lyft, instead of parking. I want to drink 3 drinks tonight or 4 drinks tonight. Why would I drive? So there is some...
I did it last night. We were only $6 Uber ride away from my buddy's house.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's an alternative to parking. And I think a lot of the parking industry says, Uber and Lyft are the enemies. At LAS, we don't really think of it that way. We think that we're a key part of the trip. And in fact, the rideshare companies really, as they displace potential people parking one person, one car, one trip, they're also creating a need for themselves. Those vehicles need to be serviced, maintained, charged. The drivers need a place to rest. Well, guess where they need to do that? They need to do that downtown or in urban environments close to where people are. And there is nowhere else to do that but parking garages. So they're really we're talking about repurposing parking spaces. As we get to a lot fewer people driving out to get their food, they want to get it delivered. Now we're talking about, we need close-in places for food to be prepared. So cloud kitchens and those kind of things. You could see that as a competitor to parking, but in actual fact, it's just a different use for space. And likewise with electric scooters and bikes, you could kind of see, well, that means fewer people driving, and that's possibly true on single trips. But those vehicles need a place to be stored, repaired, and all of those kind of things. And then autonomous vehicles, same thing. So really, all of those things, they're just a different use for space. And it's not necessarily parking as we think about it today, but what LAS is really geared up for, and what I spend a lot of my time doing is kind of making sure that our space is included in that trip, no matter what the trip looks like.
That's awesome. I wish you luck.
It's there's a lot of work, and there's a lot still to work out, obviously.
Well, yeah, but still, I mean, that's a very, very clear vision.
Right. Yeah. Look, we do have a pretty clear vision, and I think the key is one of the things I lived in San Francisco in the original .com boom, late 90s, early 2000s, and saw a lot of great ideas and not great ideas work and not work, and a lot of companies come and go. But one thing that I always think about is the original 49ers. A lot of people came from all over the world looking for gold nuggets, but the companies that did it. I thought you were
talking about San Francisco 49ers for a minute.
Well,
there.
I meant the original 49ers. Not the Steve Young era. No, the original gold miners. Some people struck gold and some people didn't strike gold, and but Levi Strauss made jeans for all of them, whether they failed or not. And when it comes down to it, there will be winners and losers in this sort of mobility race. The big guys haven't made any money out of it, and some of them will fail, and some of them will turn into far better things. And frankly, as far as parking is concerned, we really need to be in a place where it doesn't matter who we're supplying the jeans to, whether they win or lose. We just have to make sure that we provide that to everybody, and that's really where we're going.
That's fantastic. That's very, very clear. Wow. Well, hey, listen. Thank you very much for your time and sharing all that. That was good.
Yeah, you're absolutely welcome.
Cool. Well, have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the podcast. Having a great time doing this. If you're enjoying it, if you're getting value from it, please leave some feedback. Please subscribe. There's a lot of people listening, not as many subscribers. So if you could subscribe, comment, and share it. Please share it with your friends. Share it with your family. Tell your mom. Tell your dad. Tell everyone. Thanks.